Okay, so, well done to the deep dive. And, if you're at all like me, you've probably relied on Siri to set a timer, or you've asked Alexa about what the weather's going to be like outside.
Mm.
But I bet you've also wondered, at least for just a quick sec, about how private those conversations really are.
Right.
I mean, these AI assistants they're so incredibly convenient, but what exactly happens to all those things that we say to them?
Yeah.
So that's really what we're going to dive into today.
Okay.
How these AI assistants actually handle all of our data and what it really means for all of our privacy. We're going to kind of unpack that whole journey of our voice commands.
Right.
And we're going to try and give you at least some practical ways to kind of stay in the know and protect yourself and, get ready. Because I think, going into this, I had some ideas, but there were definitely some pretty eye-opening aspects to all this.
Yeah, it's easy to get used to the convenience and kind of forget what's happening behind the scenes, right? So think of this as taking a look under the hood and seeing how these things really work and what it means for you.
Okay, so let's just start right at the beginning.
Okay.
You say, "Hey Siri," or "Okay Google." What actually happens right after those magic words leave your mouth?
Well, that trigger phrase basically acts like an alert. And once the device detects it, it turns on its microphone and starts recording everything you say.
Okay.
And unlike some of the processing that happens directly on your phone or on a smart speaker, the actual audio, the raw audio of what you say, is usually sent to the cloud.
Okay.
Which is basically just remote servers that are owned and operated by, Amazon, Google, whoever.
Okay, so it actually leaves my living room.
Right.
And heads to these massive data centers.
Yeah.
So what actually goes on in there?
Well, so in the cloud, your audio is analyzed by what we call machine learning models. And these are just super advanced systems that can recognize patterns. And they've been trained on just millions and millions of past interactions.
Huh.
So they use all of that to try and understand what you're saying. They transcribe your speech into text.
Yeah.
And then they try to figure out what you're asking for, what your intent is, so they can give you the right response.
Right.
And the interesting thing here is that that actual original audio recording, a lot of times it's stored by the company.
It's stored like that. That surprises me. I guess I would think that once my request is processed, and I get the answer, it would just disappear.
Right.
So why keep it?
Well, so the main reason companies say they keep it is so they can help the AI actually get better over time.
Yeah.
The system learns by analyzing patterns in our requests. And so by looking at past interactions, the AI can get better at understanding different accents, different ways of phrasing things, and, all the subtle nuances of how we actually talk. And, companies like Amazon with Alexa and Google with Assistant have said, that's what they use this for.
Okay.
They keep these audio transcripts to just refine their models and make them more accurate.
Okay, so that makes sense from a technology improvement standpoint.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned something when we were prepping for this that kind of raised my eyebrows.
Yeah.
It wasn't just computers that were analyzing these recordings, was it?
No, and that's something that's caused a lot of privacy concern. Some of these recordings were actually manually reviewed by real people.
Wow.
And often it was done just for quality control. Just checking to see if the AI understood the requests and, gave a decent answer.
Okay.
But it's a detail that surprises a lot of people. They think that they're having a conversation with this helpful piece of technology.
Right.
And then to realize that a human might have listened to that.
Wait, hold on. Human beings were actually listening to our conversations with these devices. That's shocking. Okay, so our voices are recorded, they're sent to the cloud, they're often stored.
Yeah.
And they've even been listened to by humans in some cases.
Yeah.
So this kind of naturally leads to the big question here, which is, why should you as a listener be concerned about any of this? Like, what are the real privacy risks here?
Well, one of the biggest concerns for a lot of people is just the potential for data leaks and security breaches. Companies invest a lot of money and a lot of energy into protecting your data. But as we've seen time and time again, no system is foolproof.
Yeah.
So imagine if these recordings, which could contain all sorts of personal information, were to get into the wrong hands, from some sort of security flaw or, some kind of hack.
Right. And it's not just about, someone hearing my random questions to these devices. It could be way more sensitive stuff, right?
Absolutely. And, even beyond those direct leaks, there's also the issue of user profiling. These AI assistants are constantly gathering information about your habits, your preferences, things you talk about, essentially building this huge detailed picture of your life.
Ah.
And that data can be used to personalize ads and recommendations that you see online.
Right.
And while that might seem like a minor inconvenience, it raises a bigger question, which is who else has access to all this information about you?
So it's not just the company that provides the AI assistant. What are some of the other ways this information could be accessed?
Well, governments can request this kind of data under certain legal circumstances, and like we talked about before, hackers, if they can get past the security of these companies, they can access all these private conversations, and the sheer amount of data that's collected makes this a really valuable target for them.
Okay, so these are some pretty serious potential downsides here. This is it's way beyond just seeing more targeted ads. This is about real vulnerabilities, and the possibility of other people listening in, intentionally or not. So this brings us to, some real world situations, right, where these types of privacy issues have actually happened.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And looking at specific examples really shows you the risks. So one that got a lot of attention was in 2019 when Amazon admitted that their employees were reviewing recordings from Alexa users. Now, they said they did this to improve the system's understanding of voice commands. But the fact is that a lot of users had no clue that people were actually listening to these conversations.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that making headlines.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that a conversation you thought was just between you and your smart speaker was actually being reviewed by somebody else, that really feels like a violation of privacy.
Yeah, it does. And then there was the Google Nest security breach. And this was a big one because hackers managed to access the live video and audio feeds from the cameras and microphones that were inside people's homes. So this isn't just data that's stored on a server somewhere. It's like a direct intrusion into some of the most private parts of our lives.
That's really unsettling. I mean, having your own security devices turned against you like that really highlights the vulnerabilities we're talking about here. Were there any other incidents that we should be aware of?
Yeah, the controversy with Facebook Messenger's voice transcripts.
Okay.
It came out that voice messages that were sent through the app were being analyzed. Again, they said it was to improve the service.
Yeah.
But some of those transcripts were being reviewed by third-party contractors. And this was all happening without the users really knowing about it or giving their consent.
Wow.
So all these different incidents, when you look at them together, they show you that AI can be really convenient, but our interactions with it aren't always as private as we think. And so it's really important for users to be informed and to take steps to protect themselves.
Okay, so we've talked about the risks. We've looked at some real world examples of things going wrong. So now let's get to, what you can actually do about it. What are some steps that our listeners can take to protect their data and their privacy when they're using these AI assistants?
Well, there are a few things you can do that can make a big difference. First, you really want to go through the privacy settings for every AI assistant that you use.
Okay.
Most platforms will give you options to disable the storage of your recordings or opt out of manual reviews. So take some time, find those settings, and change them to what makes you comfortable.
Okay, so that makes sense. Knowing what choices we have is an important first step.
Yeah.
What else can we do in our day-to-day interactions with these devices?
Another thing you can do, it's really simple, but it helps, is to mute your AI assistant when you're not using it. A lot of smart speakers and some other devices will have a physical button or switch that turns off the microphone.
Right.
So if you're having a conversation with someone or you just don't want the device listening,
Right.
turning that off is an easy way to give yourself some peace of mind.
It's a good point. Out of sight, out of mind, and more importantly, out of earshot, right? So what about when we connect other apps and services to our AI assistant?
Yeah, so limiting those permissions is really important too.
Okay.
So when you link other apps to your AI assistant, whether it's like a smart home device or something else, take a look at what permissions you're granting.
Okay.
Only give access to the stuff that's absolutely necessary for that integration to work.
Okay.
Because if you give overly broad permissions, it creates more ways for people to access your data, and it can open up more security risks.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people, myself included, we tend to just click agree without really thinking about what we're actually giving access to.
Right.
You also mentioned VPN. So how does using a VPN help to protect my privacy with these assistants?
So a VPN, or a virtual private network, encrypts your internet traffic. So it basically creates this secure tunnel for your data to travel through.
Hmm.
Now, it won't necessarily stop your assistant from recording you when it's on,
Okay.
but it can stop other people from eavesdropping on your network traffic. So it adds that extra layer of security.
So it's more about securing the connection itself. Okay, so what's one final piece of advice you would give to our listeners?
Just be mindful of what you talk about when you're near your AI assistant.
Uh,
Try to avoid sharing really personal details that you wouldn't want recorded or analyzed,
okay.
because these devices can feel like a friend, but they're not the same as having a private conversation with a real person.
Right.
Right.
Right. Okay, so those are all really, useful and actionable tips. It sounds like, while we've embraced this convenience, it's really important to remember that we do have some control over how these devices work and how our data is collected, right?
Right. And it's a good idea to go into the settings of your AI assistants every so often and delete any conversations that are stored.
Okay.
And also review your activity logs. That way you can kind of stay on top of what data has been collected and you can see how the system has been using it.
Mm. Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive into, how AI assistants handle all this data, the potential risks, some real world examples of where things went wrong, and most importantly, I think, what you can actually do to protect yourself. So let's come back to that, that initial question that we had. Are our conversations with these AI assistants truly safe?
It's not an easy yes or no answer.
Right.
While this AI technology has all these great benefits and it's constantly evolving, privacy isn't always at the top of the list of priorities when they're designing it.
Right.
And the fact is, the collection and analysis of our data is a core part of how these systems work and improve.
Right. So it sounds like the main takeaway here is that we need to stay informed and we need to be proactive.
Absolutely.
The responsibility for protecting our privacy in this increasingly AI-driven world is really up to us as users.
Yeah, keeping yourself up to date on how companies are handling data and managing your privacy settings. Those are really essential skills.
It really is. This has been, a super eye-opening discussion. I know I'm going to go back and take a look at my AI settings after all of this. So, here's just a final thought for you, for our listeners to kind of ponder, after this episode is over. Given how quickly AI is being integrated into basically every part of our lives, way beyond just these assistants, what does this mean for personal privacy as a whole in the long term?
Yeah.
It's not just about what happens when we say, "Hey, Siri," anymore. It's really about these fundamental ways that our data is being collected and used and protected in the years to come, and what that means for our freedoms and how society operates. So think about that. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.